I'm 40 years old, and I just kissed a woman for the first time in my life. And the terrifying part? It felt more right than anything I've ever done. My name is Mia, and if you had told me a year ago that my entire life would turn upside down during a summer camp trip with my son, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, telling you a story about love, real, terrifying, beautiful love, that came crashing into my carefully ordered world like a storm I never saw coming. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was late June, and the summer heat had settled over our small town like a heavy blanket. My son, Danny, had been begging me for months to let him go to Camp Riverside, this sleepaway camp about 2 hours north where kids could swim, hike, do archery, and pretend to be wilderness explorers for 2 weeks. He was 11 years old, full of energy and excitement, and I knew I couldn't say no to those bright eyes of his. But here's the thing about being a single mom. You worry. You worry about everything. Is he eating enough? Will the other kids be nice to him? What if he gets homesick? What if something happens and I'm not there? So when I saw that the camp needed parent volunteers to serve as counselors, I didn't hesitate. I signed up immediately. My boss at the accounting firm wasn't thrilled about me taking 2 weeks off during the summer, but I had the vacation days saved up, and honestly, I needed a break from spreadsheets and client calls. I needed to be with my son, to make sure he was safe and happy. The morning we left, Danny could barely sit still in the car. He kept talking about all the things he wanted to do, how he hoped to learn to canoe, how maybe he'd catch a fish bigger than his head. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Since the divorce 3 years ago, it had been just the two of us. Danny was my whole world, and the thought of him growing up, needing me less, scared me more than I wanted to admit. We arrived at Camp Riverside around noon. The place was exactly what you'd picture. Tall pine trees everywhere, wooden cabins scattered around a central lodge, and a beautiful lake that sparkled in the sunlight. Parents and kids were everywhere, unloading cars, hugging goodbye, some children crying, others running toward the lake with pure joy. I helped Danny carry his duffel bag to his cabin, making sure he had everything he needed. He barely noticed when I kissed his forehead goodbye. He was already making friends with the boy in the bunk next to his. That's when it hit me. He was going to be fine. It was me who needed to relax. The parent counselors had our own cabin, smaller but comfortable, with 6 bunk beds. I claimed a bottom bunk near the window and started unpacking my things when I heard voices outside. Through the screen, I could see the camp director, a cheerful woman named Margaret, leading a group of adults toward our cabin. And this is where our wonderful parent volunteers will be staying. Margaret announced as the door swung open. Everyone, please come in and get settled. We'll have an orientation meeting in an hour at the main lodge. That's when I saw her. She walked in with a quiet confidence that immediately caught my attention. Tall, maybe 5'9", with short dark hair that fell just above her ears, styled in a way that looked effortlessly cool. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a green flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. But something about the way she carried herself made her stand out. She had strong features, a defined jawline, and these warm brown eyes that seemed to take everything in at once. She smiled at the group, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and then she looked directly at me. Just for a second, our eyes met, and I felt something, a flutter, maybe, or just surprise at being noticed. I quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in organizing my toiletries. "Hi everyone," she said, her voice clear and warm. "I'm Ella. My son's in cabin 4, super excited about the archery program. Looking forward to spending the next 2 weeks with all of you." Other parents introduced themselves, but I barely heard them. I was too busy stealing glances at Ella as she chose the bunk across from mine, efficiently unpacking her bag like someone who had done this before. She moved with purpose, no wasted motion, and I found myself thinking, she probably has everything under control. Not like me, always second-guessing, always worried. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I managed to sound relatively normal. "I'm Mia. My son Danny is in cabin 2. This is our first time doing anything like this, so I'm probably going to need all the help I can get." Ella looked up and smiled at me again. "First times are the best times. You'll figure it out. We all will." There was something reassuring in her voice, something that made me want to believe her. The orientation meeting was a blur of information: schedules, safety protocols, meal times, emergency procedures. I tried to focus, taking notes like I was back in school, but I kept finding my attention drifting to Ella, who sat 2 rows ahead of me. She asked intelligent questions, laughed easily at Margaret's jokes, and seemed completely at ease. After the meeting, we had free time before dinner. I decided to walk down to the lake to clear my head. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, and the water was so still it looked like glass. I sat on the dock, dangling my feet over the edge, trying to quiet the endless chatter in my mind. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find Ella standing behind me, hands in her pockets, looking out at the lake. It really is, I said, scooting over to make room. I didn't expect it to be this peaceful. She sat down beside me, leaving a comfortable distance between us. I come here every summer with my son, Jake. It's become our tradition. Gets us away from the chaos of real life for a bit. You've been here before? I asked, surprised. 3rd year in a row, she said with a smile. Trust me, by day 3, you'll feel like you've been doing this forever. The routine becomes second nature. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a family of ducks glide across the water. Then Ella spoke again. So, Danny's in cabin 2. Is it just the 2 of you at home? I nodded. Divorced. 3 years now. His dad's in Seattle, so it's mostly just us. Same here, Ella said softly. Jake's dad left when he was 5. Moved across the country for work and just never really looked back. So yeah, I get it. The single mom thing. It's not easy. There was something in her voice, not bitterness exactly, but a weariness I recognized. We'd both been through it, the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the endless days of being both mother and father, of carrying everything on our shoulders. How do you do it? I asked. You seem so together. So confident. Ella laughed, a real laugh that surprised me. Is that what I look like? Trust me, most days I'm just winging it. But I've learned that if you fake confidence long enough, sometimes it becomes real. I smiled at that. I'll have to try that technique. It works, she said. Well, some of the time anyway. The dinner bell rang from the main lodge, and we both stood up. As we walked back together, Ella told me about Jake, how he loved sports and science, how he wanted to be a marine biologist when he grew up. I told her about Danny, his obsession with building things, his collection of rocks that he swore were all unique and special. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was talking to someone who truly understood. Not just understood my words, but understood me. The exhaustion, the love, the constant worry mixed with pride. That first evening set the pattern for the days that followed. The camp had a rhythm to it. Wake-up call at 7, breakfast at 7:30. Then the kids split into different activity groups while we counselors rotated supervising. Morning activities ran until lunch, then rest time, then afternoon activities, then dinner, and finally evening programs, campfires, talent shows, movie nights. Ella and I kept finding ourselves paired together. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but by the 3rd day, I realized Margaret was deliberately putting us on the same shifts. You two work well together, she told us during a quick break. Natural team. And we were. When I got flustered trying to organize a group of rowdy kids for a nature hike, Ella would step in with a joke or a game that got everyone focused. When she was setting up the archery range and struggling with the target stands, I'd help without being asked. We developed an unspoken communication, reading each other's cues, covering each other's blind spots. The more time we spent together, the more I looked forward to seeing her each morning. I'd wake up earlier than necessary, take extra care getting ready. Not in an obvious way, just making sure I looked presentable. I told myself it was about being professional, about making a good impression on the kids. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I started noticing little things about her. The way she threw her head back when she laughed, completely unself-conscious. The way she squatted down to talk to kids at their eye level, never talking down to them. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The small scar above her left eyebrow that I wondered about but never asked. On the 4th day, during a swimming session at the lake, I watched her teach a scared little girl how to float. She was patient, encouraging, holding the girl gently until she trusted the water to hold her. When the girl finally floated on her own, the pure joy on both their faces made my chest ache. Why am I feeling this way? I asked myself that night, lying in my bunk while the other counselors slept. This is just friendship. She's just a nice person, and we're getting along well. That's all. But my racing heart when she touched my shoulder to get my attention told a different story. The way I found excuses to sit next to her at meals told a different story. The way I replayed our conversations in my head before falling asleep told a different story. I tried to push it down, to logic it away. I was 40 years old. I'd been married to a man. I'd never thought about women this way before. This was just loneliness, I told myself. Just the comfort of finding a friend who understood my life. Then came the day of the big hike. It was day 6 of camp, and Margaret had organized an all-day hike to a scenic overlook about 4 miles into the forest. All the kids and counselors would go together, a grand adventure. Danny had been talking about it non-stop, making sure he had the right shoes, the right backpack. The morning started perfectly. The weather was ideal, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze. The trail wound through dense forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden beams. The kids were excited, chattering and laughing as we climbed. Ella and I naturally fell into step together, our sons running ahead with the other kids. We talked about everything and nothing, books we'd read, movies we'd seen, memories from our own childhoods. She told me about growing up in a small town in Oregon, how she'd always felt a little different, a little out of place. I told her about my strict Catholic upbringing in Boston, how I'd followed all the rules, done everything I was supposed to do, and still ended up divorced and starting over. Sometimes the rules don't work, Ella said thoughtfully. Sometimes you have to write your own. Before I could respond, we heard a cry from up ahead. Danny had tripped on a root and twisted his ankle. It wasn't serious, he could still walk, but he was in pain and fighting back tears. Ella was there before I even reached him. She knelt down, gently examining his ankle, her touch careful and sure. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "That was a pretty tough route. I've fallen over that exact same one before." Danny looked up at her with watery eyes. "Really?" "Oh yeah," she said seriously. Face planted right into the dirt. "Your mom's much braver than I am. She's not even crying." He gave a small laugh despite his pain. Ella pulled off his heavy backpack and swung it onto her own shoulders on top of her own pack. "I'll carry this for you, and you know what? I've got the best hiking stories to keep your mind off that ankle. Ever hear about the time I saw a bear steal someone's sandwich?" For the next 2 miles, Ella walked beside Danny, keeping him distracted with increasingly ridiculous stories. I walked behind them, watching her carry 2 heavy packs without complaint, watching her make my son laugh when he was hurting, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. This wasn't just friendship. This wasn't just loneliness or comfort. This was something deeper, something that terrified me. When we finally reached the overlook, the view was breathtaking. Rolling mountains as far as you could see, valleys filled with mist, the whole world spread out before us. Everyone cheered and took pictures. Danny was feeling better, his ankle just slightly sore now, and he ran off to explore with Jake. Ella and I stood at the edge, looking out at the view. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for helping with Danny, for being so good with him." She turned to me, and there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. "You don't have to thank me, Mia. I care about him. And I care about you." The way she said it, "I care about you," made my breath catch. There was weight behind those words, meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. We stood there for a long moment, the sounds of happy kids behind us, the vast, beautiful world in front of us, and something unspoken hanging in the air between us. Then Jake called for Ella, and the moment broke. We headed back down the mountain with the group, but something had shifted. I felt it, and I was certain she felt it too. That evening, after the kids were asleep in their cabins, there was a counselor bonfire. Someone had brought a guitar, and people were singing old camp songs, roasting marshmallows, telling stories. It was warm and communal, exactly the kind of thing I usually enjoyed. But I couldn't focus. I was too aware of Ella sitting across the fire from me, the flames painting her face in warm light and shadow. Every time our eyes met, I felt that flutter again, that pull. Around 10 o'clock, people started drifting off to bed. Ella stood up and stretched, then caught my eye. "Want to take a walk?" she asked. "I'm not quite ready to sleep yet." I should have said no. I should have gone to my cabin, crawled into my bunk, and gotten some rest. But instead, I heard myself say, "Sure. That sounds nice." We walked away from the main camp area, following a path that led toward the lake. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Our footsteps were quiet on the dirt path, and neither of us spoke. When we reached the lake, Ella led us to a wooden bench that overlooked the water. We sat down, still not speaking, just listening to the gentle lap of small waves against the shore. Finally, Ella broke the silence. "Can I ask you something, Mia?" "Of course," I said, though my heart was suddenly pounding. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Have you ever felt like your whole life was one thing, and then suddenly you realize it could be something completely different? Like you've been following a map, but the map was for the wrong destination." I turned to look at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. I think I know what you mean. Is that how you feel?" She nodded slowly. "I thought I had everything figured out after my divorce. Work, raise Jake, build a stable life. Keep things simple, keep my heart protected. But then," she trailed off, looking out at the water. "But then what?" I whispered. She turned to face me, and in the moonlight, her eyes were luminous. "But then I met someone who made me remember what it feels like to actually feel something. Someone who made me want to take the risk." My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Ella, I know this is complicated," she said quickly. "I know we barely know each other. I know you might not feel the same way. And if you don't, we can just forget I said anything and go back to being friends. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest." "Honest about what?" I asked, even though I knew. Even though I could feel it in every fiber of my being. "About the fact that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the fact that every time I see you smile, it makes my day better. About the fact that I'm falling for you, Mia, and it scares the hell out of me, but I can't seem to stop it." The world stopped. Everything, the crickets chirping, the water lapping, my own breathing. All of it faded away until there was only Ella's face, her eyes searching mine, waiting for me to say something, anything. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, fear, confusion, but also something else. Something that felt like recognition, like finally hearing someone speak a truth I'd been too afraid to admit to myself. I started, then stopped. Tried again. I haven't. "You've never been with a woman," Ella finished gently. "I know. And if that means this is too much, too strange, I understand. Really, I do. But that wasn't what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say was that I'd never felt this way about anyone, man or woman. That the intensity of what I was feeling for her was unlike anything I'd experienced in my marriage, in any relationship I'd ever had. What I was trying to say was that she was right. I had been following the wrong map. And now, sitting here on this bench under the stars, I was finally on the right path. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and took hers. Her fingers were warm, strong, and they closed around mine with gentle certainty. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Ella said softly. "But maybe we can figure it out together?" I looked into her eyes and saw everything I was feeling reflected back at me. The fear, the hope, the desperate want. "Okay," I whispered. "Together." And then she leaned closer, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. For the first time in so long, I wanted to move towards something instead of running away. When her lips touched mine, soft and questioning, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, barely more than a whisper of contact. Ella's lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of the mint tea she'd drunk by the campfire. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was certain she could feel it, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in closer, my free hand coming up to rest against her shoulder. She deepened the kiss slowly, carefully, like she was reading a language written on my lips. There was no rush, no urgency, just this slow, sweet exploration that made my entire body come alive. I felt her breath mix with mine, felt the gentle pressure of her fingers tightening around my hand, felt the warmth radiating from her skin. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. My eyes fluttered open to find her watching me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. The moonlight caught in her eyes, making them shimmer, and I realized I was trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her thumb stroking gentle circles on the back of my hand. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Inside, my mind was racing. What just happened? What am I doing? This changes everything. But beneath the panic was something else, a feeling so pure and right that it drowned out all my fears. "I didn't plan this," Ella whispered, echoing my thoughts. "I didn't come here expecting to feel this way about anyone. But Mia, this feels right. Does it feel right to you?" I searched for words, for some way to express the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Finally, I managed. "It feels like I've been asleep for years, and I'm just now waking up." A smile spread across her face, soft and beautiful. "Yeah," she breathed. "Exactly like that." We sat there for a long moment, hands still intertwined, foreheads nearly touching. The night wrapped around us like a cocoon, private and safe. I could hear the water lapping against the shore, could smell the pine trees and the faint scent of wood smoke from the dying campfire, could feel the solid warmth of Ella beside me. "What do we do now?" I asked, voicing the question that was already gnawing at the edges of my happiness. Ella was quiet, thinking. "I don't know," she admitted. I have dated women before. But this feels different. More complicated because of the kids, because we barely know each other, because we live in the real world where things aren't always easy. "Tell me about it," I said with a shaky laugh. I've never even kissed a woman before tonight, and now I'm sitting here wondering how my entire life just changed in the span of 5 minutes. "Regrets?" she asked, and I heard the vulnerability beneath the question. I looked at her, really looked at her. At the way the moonlight caught in her short dark hair, at the strong line of her jaw, at the hope and fear mixed in her eyes. I thought about how she'd carried Danny's backpack without being asked, how she made me laugh, how she understood the weight of single motherhood in a way no one else ever had. "No," I said firmly. "No regrets. Just fear. A lot of fear." "I can work with fear," Ella said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Fear means you care enough to be scared." "Oh, I definitely care enough," I said, and surprised myself by laughing. "I care so much it's terrifying." She lifted our joined hands and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, a gesture so sweet and old-fashioned it made my heart flutter all over again. "Then let's be terrified together. Let's take this one day at a time and see where it goes. No pressure, no expectations. Just us figuring it out. One day at a time," I repeated, testing the words. They felt manageable, less overwhelming than thinking about the future, about what this meant for my life, my son, my carefully constructed world. We sat there a while longer, talking in soft voices about everything and nothing. Ella told me about her first relationship with a woman in college, how she'd known from a young age that she was attracted to both men and women, but how society's expectations had pushed her into a traditional marriage that ultimately failed. I told her about my own marriage, about the slow death of love, about the loneliness of being with someone who didn't really see you. "Do you see me?" I asked at one point, surprising myself with the directness of the question. Ella turned to face me fully, her eyes intense. "I see you, Mia. I see how hard you work to be strong for Danny. I see how you doubt yourself even though you're doing an amazing job. I see the kindness in how you treat the kids, the way you listen when people talk. I see the sadness you try to hide and the hope you're afraid to hold on to. I see you." Tears pricked at my eyes. When was the last time someone had really seen me? Not the role I played, mother, employee, ex-wife, but me, the person underneath all those labels? "I see you too," I whispered. "And I want to keep seeing you. After camp ends, after we go back to our regular lives. I want to try this." "Me too," Ella said, and her smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. Eventually, we knew we had to get back. It was past midnight, and we had early morning duties. We walked slowly back to our cabin, hands swinging between us like teenagers. At the door, Ella squeezed my hand once more. "Sleep well, Mia," she whispered. "You too," I said and slipped inside. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in my bunk, staring at the wooden slats of the bunk above me, replaying every moment of the evening. My lips still tingled from the kiss. My hand still felt warm where Ella had held it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, felt that connection that had sparked between us. Across the cabin, I could hear the quiet breathing of the other counselors. Did they know? Could they sense that something monumental had shifted in my world tonight? I rolled over and found myself looking directly at Ella's bunk. In the dim light filtering through the windows, I could just make out her form. As if sensing my gaze, she turned her head, and our eyes met across the space between us. Even in the darkness, I could see her smile. My heart swelled with an emotion so big I didn't have a name for it. This was real. This was happening. And tomorrow, I'd have to figure out how to act normal while feeling like my entire world had been transformed. The next morning came too quickly. I woke to the sound of the wake-up bell, groggy and disoriented. For a moment, I wondered if last night had been a dream. Then I saw Ella getting up from her bunk, and when our eyes met, the soft smile on her face confirmed it had been very, very real. At breakfast, we sat together as we always did, but now every casual touch, her hand brushing mine as she passed the coffee pot, our knees bumping under the table, felt charged with electricity. I was hyper-aware of her presence, of the way she laughed at someone's joke, of how she helped serve food to the kids streaming through the dining hall. Danny appeared at our table, his plate piled high with pancakes. "Mom, Jake and I are going to be partners for the canoe race today. Isn't that cool?" I smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's great, honey. Just promise me you'll wear your life jacket the whole time." "MOM," he groaned, rolling his eyes in that way 11-year-olds do. "I'm not a baby." Ella laughed. "Your mom's right, though. Jake, you better wear yours too, or you'll have to answer to me." Jake, who had joined us with his own plate, nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. We'll be super safe. The safest canoe team ever." The boys ran off to join their friends, leaving Ella and me alone again. She leaned closer, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "How are you doing?" "Sleep okay." "Barely slept at all," I admitted. "Too much thinking." "Good thinking or bad thinking?" I considered this. Scared thinking, but also happy thinking. Is that possible? To be both at once? "I think that's the definition of anything worth having," Ella said, her eyes warm. "If it doesn't scare you a little, it probably doesn't matter enough." Before I could respond, Margaret appeared at our table with her clipboard and her ever-present smile. "Mia, Ella. Perfect. I need you two on waterfront duty for the canoe races. You work so well together, and the kids love you both." "No problem," Ella said smoothly, while my heart did a little flip at the thought of spending the whole morning with her. The canoe races turned out to be exactly the distraction I needed. The lake was full of kids paddling enthusiastically, if not always skillfully, while we counselors supervised from the dock and the safety boat. Danny and Jake were surprisingly coordinated, their canoe cutting through the water with determined strokes. "They make a good team," Ella observed, standing beside me at the end of the dock. "They do," I agreed. "It's nice seeing Danny have a friend like Jake. He doesn't open up to other kids easily." "Jake's the same way," Ella said. "But he's been talking about Danny nonstop. Danny showed me this cool rock. Danny knows all about constellations. Danny said this funny thing." She mimicked her son's enthusiastic voice, making me laugh. "Really? Danny talks about Jake the same way. This morning he told me Jake was the coolest person at camp." We watched as the boys' canoe approached the finish line, both of them paddling furiously, their faces set with determination. They crossed third, and the way they high-fived each other made my chest feel tight with affection. Not just for Danny, but for Jake too, and for the woman standing beside me who had raised such a kind, wonderful kid. "Ella," I said quietly, still watching the boys. "I need to ask you something." "Anything," she said, and I could feel her attention shift fully to me. "How do we do this?" "With them, I mean. Danny and Jake. When do we tell them? How do we tell them?" It was the question that had been keeping me up all night, the practical reality that came crashing in after the romance of last night's kiss. We weren't just two people exploring a new relationship. We were mothers, and every decision we made affected our children. Ella was quiet for a moment, watching the next group of canoes launch. I don't think we tell them anything yet, she said finally. Not until we know what this is, where it's going. They're happy being friends. Let's not complicate that until we're sure we have something real to share. So we keep it secret? I asked, and I couldn't keep the uncertainty out of my voice. Not secret, Ella corrected gently. Private. There's a difference. We're not hiding or lying. We're just giving ourselves time to figure this out before we involve them. Does that make sense? It did make sense, even though part of me hated the idea of keeping anything from Danny. But Ella was right. We needed to understand what we were to each other before we could explain it to two 11-year-old boys. Okay, I agreed. Private, not secret. We can do that. Ella's hand brushed against mine, hidden from view by our bodies. Thank you for understanding. And Mia? Last night wasn't a fluke for me. I meant everything I said. Me too, I whispered, just as a canoe full of shrieking kids tipped over, requiring our immediate attention. The next few days fell into a pattern that was both wonderful and torturous. During the day, around the kids and other counselors, Ella and I maintained our friendly, professional relationship. We worked together, laughed together, and no one seemed to notice anything different. But at night, after the kids were asleep and the other counselors had turned in, we found time for ourselves. We'd meet by the lake, or take walks through the quiet camp, or sit on the bench that had become our spot. We talked for hours about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears, our failed marriages, and everything in between. And we kissed. Soft kisses that made my heart race. Longer kisses that made me forget where I was. Each one felt like a revelation, like discovering a part of myself I hadn't known existed. I feel like a teenager sneaking around, I confessed one night, laughing as we huddled together on the bench, sharing Ella's jacket against the cool night air. A very responsible teenager who's back in her bunk by midnight, Ella teased. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of thrilling, isn't it? Having this thing that's just ours. It is, I admitted. Though I keep worrying someone will notice. Let them notice, Ella said with a shrug. We're two adults spending time together. Even if someone suspects something, so what? We're not doing anything wrong. But it didn't feel that simple. I'd spent my whole life following the rules, meeting expectations, being the good daughter, the good wife, the good mother. This thing with Ella was so far outside those boundaries that it felt both liberating and terrifying. On the 10th day of camp, something happened that tested our careful privacy. It was during an afternoon free swim period. I was sitting on the dock with a book, half reading and half watching Danny and Jake play with a group of kids in the shallow water. Ella was on lifeguard duty, perched in the tall chair with her whistle and sunglasses, looking annoyingly attractive in her camp t-shirt and shorts. One of the other counselors, a woman named Patricia who'd been friendly but somewhat nosy, sat down beside me. Those two are thick as thieves, she said, nodding toward our sons. It's sweet. It really is, I agreed, smiling as I watched Danny splash Jake, who immediately splashed back with twice the water. And you and Ella seem to have hit it off too, Patricia continued, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I've noticed you two spending a lot of time together. My stomach clenched. We get along well, I said carefully. She's been really helpful, since this is my first time volunteering. Patricia said, and there was something in her voice that made me look at her directly. She was smiling, but it was a knowing smile. Well, it's nice. Everyone should have a good friend at camp. Was she implying something? Did she know? I wanted to ask, but I was afraid of what the answer might be. Instead, I just nodded and pretended to return to my book, even though I couldn't focus on a single word. That evening, I told Ella about the conversation. We were sitting in our usual spot, the stars bright overhead, and I watched her face carefully as I relayed Patricia's words. Do you think she knows? I asked anxiously. Ella considered this. Maybe. Or maybe she's just observant and noticed we're friends. Either way, does it matter? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't want people gossiping. I don't want it to get back to Danny before we're ready to tell him. Hey, Ella said softly, taking my hand. Look at me. I did, finding comfort in her steady gaze. We're not doing anything wrong, she said firmly. We're two single women who found something special with each other. If Patricia knows, if everyone knows, that doesn't change what this is. It doesn't make it less real or less valid. I know that here, I said, touching my head. But here, I moved my hand to my heart. I'm still working on believing it. Then let me believe it for both of us until you catch up, Ella said, and kissed me gently. The days flew by too quickly after that. Suddenly, it was the last full day of camp, and I felt a sense of panic rising in my chest. Tomorrow, we'd pack up and leave. We'd go back to our separate lives, our separate towns. Would this thing between us survive in the real world? The final night of camp was always special. A big campfire with all the kids and counselors, songs and stories and esmores, a celebration of the 2 weeks we'd shared. Danny was buzzing with excitement, sad to leave but happy to have had such an adventure. He and Jake had already exchanged phone numbers and made plans to keep in touch. As the campfire burned down and kids started heading to their cabins for the last time, Ella caught my eye and tilted her head toward the lake. I nodded slightly, understanding. 20 minutes later, after making sure Danny was settled in his cabin, I found her waiting at our bench. Last night, she said as I sat down beside her. Can you believe it? I don't want it to be the last night, I admitted. I don't want this to end. It doesn't have to end, Ella said, turning to face me. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Mia, I live 45 minutes from you. I looked it up. That's nothing. We can see each other. We can make this work if we want to. I want to, I said immediately. God, I want to so much. But I'm scared. What if it's different outside of this place? What if the real world is too complicated? Then we'll figure it out, Ella said with quiet confidence. We'll take it slow. We'll be careful with the boys. But Mia, I'm not ready to walk away from this. Are you? I thought about the past 10 days. About discovering parts of myself I hadn't known existed. About feeling truly seen and valued for the first time in years. About kisses under the stars and conversations that lasted until dawn. About falling in love, because that's what this was, I realized with stunning clarity. I was falling in love with Ella. No, I said firmly. I'm not ready to walk away either. The relief on Ella's face was palpable. She pulled me close, wrapping her arms around me, and I melted into her embrace. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other under the stars, memorizing the feeling of being together. We should exchange numbers, I said eventually, laughing at the teenage-like quality of the statement. Already have yours, Ella said with a grin. I may have looked at the counselor contact list and saved it in my phone 3 days ago. You did not, I said, laughing and swatting her arm. I absolutely did, she confirmed, completely unrepentant. I wanted to make sure I could reach you after we left. That's actually really sweet, I admitted. I can be sweet when properly motivated, Ella said and kissed me again. This kiss was different from all the others. It was deeper, more urgent, carrying all the emotion of an ending and a beginning rolled into one. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. Come visit me next weekend, Ella said suddenly. Bring Danny. Tell him Jake invited him over to hang out. We can spend the day together, all of us, and then after the boys go to bed, you and I can talk more. Figure out our next steps. That could work, I said, my mind already spinning with the logistics. I could tell Danny it's a play date. He'd be excited about that. Then it's a plan, Ella said, and the way she smiled at me made my heart soar. We sat there until nearly midnight making plans, talking about the future, stealing kisses between sentences. Finally, reluctantly, we headed back to the cabin one last time. As I lay in my bunk that night, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Camp was ending. This magical bubble we'd been living in was about to burst. But something real was beginning, something worth fighting for. Across the cabin, Ella caught my eye one last time and mouthed, "Sweet dreams." I mouthed back, "You too," and fell asleep with a smile on my face. The next morning was chaos. Packing, cleaning, kids running around making last-minute memories, parents arriving to pick up their children. Danny and I loaded our bags into the car, and I felt that familiar pang of leaving somewhere special. Ella and Jake were packing up their own car a few spots down. Our eyes met across the parking lot, and she smiled. That private smile that was just for me. "Mom, can Jake come over soon?" Danny asked as we finished loading the trunk. We want to build that rocket we've been planning. Actually, I said, trying to sound casual, how would you feel about going to Jake's house next weekend? I bet his mom wouldn't mind. Danny's eyes lit up. Really? That would be awesome. Can we, Mom? Please. Let me check with Jake's mom, I said, walking toward Ella's car with Danny bouncing beside me. Ella looked up as we approached, and I saw the warmth in her eyes. Hey guys. All packed up. Jake, Danny called, and the two boys immediately started talking a mile a minute about their plans. Danny was wondering if he could visit next weekend. I said to Ella, keeping my voice level and friendly. Would that work for you? That would be perfect, Ella said, and I heard the double meaning in her words. How about Saturday? You could bring him over around noon. Stay for dinner? Stay for dinner? I repeated, my heart beating faster. Sure, Ella said with a casual shrug that didn't fool me for a second. The boys can play, and you and I can catch up. It's been a great 2 weeks. I'd like to stay in touch. I'd like that too, I said softly. The boys were already planning their entire day, oblivious to the undercurrent flowing between their mothers. Ella pulled out her phone, and we officially exchanged numbers, right there in the parking lot, making it real. Text me when you get home, she said. So I know you made it safely. I will, I promised. There was a moment where I wanted to hug her, to kiss her goodbye, to acknowledge what we were to each other. But not here, not now, not with the boys and other parents around. So instead, I just held her gaze and hoped she could see everything I was feeling. See you Saturday, she said. Saturday, I confirmed. Danny and I got in the car and started the drive home. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Ella standing there, watching us go. She lifted her hand in a small wave, and I waved back. I really like Jake, Danny said from the back seat. And his mom is really cool too. You like her, right, Mom? Yeah, honey, I said, my voice soft. I like her very much. As we drove away from Camp Riverside, leaving behind 2 weeks that had changed my life forever, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid hope for the future. My phone buzzed an hour into the drive. At the next rest stop, I checked it and found a message from Ella. Made it home. Can't stop thinking about you. Is it Saturday yet? I smiled and typed back. Not soon enough. But we'll get there. And we would. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever fears I still had to face, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. What Ella and I had found was worth fighting for. It was worth the risk, worth the fear, worth stepping outside every boundary I'd ever known. Love, real, unexpected, transformative love, had swept through my life like a storm. And instead of running for shelter, I was learning to dance in the rain. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out what came next. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. So that's my story. The summer everything changed. The moment I stopped living by everyone else's rules and started writing my own. If you made it this far, thank you for taking this journey with me. Please show some love by hitting the like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Drop a comment and tell me, what moment in your life changed everything? I read every single one, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear what happened next, how I told Danny, how Ella and I built our life together, all the beautiful and messy parts, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this story, it's far from over, and neither is yours.